This one is even freer than the one before. This is this is a mystic sandbox.
I just hit run.
I've been recording for 56 seconds.
Local recording check. So you're telling me we got Mystic Sandbox on the recording, Josh?
We've got Mystic Sandbox on the record. I mean, as soon as I said it, I'm like, oh, I'm saying that on the episode because I want us to get mystical.
Huff that chiasm in a mystical sandbox.
Yes.
Oh my God,
man, we need a Huff the Chiasm jingle. That's the next one we should aim for. Too bad we don't have a chiasm today. Oh my gosh.
I mean, we can make a chiasm if we need to.
I was gonna say Brian David's probably like, if you read any text, I'll just double dog dare you.
This is the Bema Podcast with Marty Solomon. I'm his co-host, Brent Billings. Today we are exploring the depths of Shabbat with Josh Bossé.
We've been through a lot. We've talked about keeping Shabbat. We've talked about remembering it. And we've talked about breaking it, making and breaking. And now I'd like for us to just take a big step back.
Okay, hold on. We got to wrap up the breaking Shabbat thing. We had this random idea in the last episode that we didn't circle back to. Before we get into any more Heschel quotes or the depths of Shabbat, we all thought we were going to be talking about like breaking Shabbat at the end of Shabbat. And I have discovered, I didn't even know this at the beginning, I've discovered in more recent years, the prayers and the practices and the Shabbat liturgy that exists for at least Orthodox Torah observant Jews to close Shabbat and get out of Shabbat. And those are things that I don't have any practices, Josh. Every year our family adds something. I know when my daughter was bat mitzvahed, she added the practice of Shabbat candles to our family. And almost every year we add something new because we don't want to get too crazy or too complex or get overburdened with our observance in our context that we talked about in the last episode. But we try to add something, some new little wrinkle that is life-giving. I'm wondering if that's not my next wrinkle, is some practice we now have practices to get us formally into Shabbat, thanks to my daughter.
Yeah.
And now, do you have any practices, Josh, of getting out of Shabbat on the back end and closing Shabbat down and entering again a week of work and melacha?
That's a great question. So in a practical way we do, because we usually do a lot of our chores on Friday, but sometimes life happens and we don't. And so then Sunday becomes our chore day. So like Friday and Sunday are kind of like buffer days around Shabbat. So in a practical sense, those are the days where, we have the family meeting, we talk about the stuff. So in that sense, we have a little bit of the onboarding, offboarding, preparing the house so it's the right atmosphere, and then having a day to get, our feet planted firmly before we get to the grind. But not especially. However, one Mitch Lavender has shared with me a wonderful Shabbat practice that I really love. So what he's told me that they do is that at the beginning of the Shabbat, they talk about all the best things of the last week, what the last week has been and what they've loved about it. And then at the end of Shabbat, they talk about all the wonderful things they've experienced on Shabbat, like kind of a reflection.
Oh.
And I like that a lot.
Yeah.
This is the perfect episode to talk about it.
I was just going to say, I think adding those wrinkles year after year, and if that's our next wrinkle in the Solomon household, that's one way that we deepen our Shabbat experience, is to add, and not in an overbearing way, just enough, just adding enough wrinkles that we get a little bit more perspective and a little bit new experience. And it's always this dynamic, growing, evolving thing. So
yeah,
I was going to say I digress, but I don't.
Yeah, you're not digressing. If anything, you're pushing us forward. And that is great because there's so much we could talk about here. This episode, I really just want us to be able to tap into the the just the purely spiritual side of Shabbat. Obviously, this whole series is about, the practice and the practicality of it. And so in that sense, that might sound kind of opposite to getting mystical, but I want us to get our hands dirty. I want us to play around in this mystical sandbox and, get into all those things. What actually is, like, what are, I think one of the first things that I think of when I think about like going deeper into Shabbat is like, if we go down to the roots of it, why Shabbat? What Shabbat? Like we've talked about these things earlier in the process, but like what on a mystical spiritual level, what are we doing? And this is, I'm setting myself up to share a Heschel quote.
Not again, not another one.
I know. So this is one that really lit a fire under me and really dovetailed with the, Shabbat has always been by far my favorite spiritual practice, and this is
a good one.
Just put some nos in the tank.
Yeah, this is a good one here. This is a good quote.
Unless one learns how to relish the taste of Shabbat, one will be unable to enjoy the taste of eternity in the world to come. Dang. Like, to me, this is, at least to start us off, like this is compelling to me. A lot of times when I think about like enriching and deepening spirituality and spiritual practices, I think about like it's kind of almost an artistic process. It's an expression of what the Spirit's doing in my life. It's kind of a proactive thing, right? Like I'm going out ahead of what is required by the day to day or what is normal for my spiritual community. I'm going further out in front. But this idea that the experience of Shabbat is like learning to acquire this taste of heaven, of what comes next, and learning to appreciate on just like not just in a spiritual way, but in a gestalt, like a whole being, that from the sensory aspect down to the deepest spiritual recesses of our heart, that we learn to love and crave Shabbat. Like what is it? If you're someone who is addicted to this, empire, just like beat the competitions, stack the racks of the cash and just, become a master of the universe. When you get to heaven, like, sorry, but like you're not going to have a great time, because that's not what God's kingdom is about. It might be a little hard to appreciate that. Not trying to say anything theological, but just, experientially. So I think this kind of puts a little bit of a weightiness behind like, what is it that we are actually engaging with? What are we playing with when we play on Shabbat? And what are we trying to, like, how are we growing? And so I think this idea of like a foretaste of what is to come, a foretaste of the reality that God is ultimately calling us into and ushering us, bringing us into. And that fits with a lot of the idea of like eternal life and, all those conversations we've had. But yeah, how does this hit all of you?
I love it. And the thing that keeps coming to mind as we have this conversation, and the last one in the last episode, there are these two passages, Josh, that drive, like I'm an abstract guy. What I love about talking with you all the time, but in these episodes, is you bring things into the concrete and the practical. And it's so helpful for me because it pulls it out of the abstract. My brain always functions in the abstract. And I have these two stories in the Gospels of Jesus that I think about subconsciously endlessly when I think about Shabbat, like when I'm trying to make decisions. Like these things are just like immediately, they're almost like background programs that are just running. Mm-hmm. Is that the right term, Brent? What is the right term there? What am I trying to say?
Typically a background program that just kind of runs without any like visual thing. It's called a daemon.
How great. How wonderfully perfect.
We're going to redeem the demons, it turns out.
Well, there we go. But I do. I have this, this background operating system for Shabbat, these two passages. And I think if you're okay, Josh, I'm going to have Brent read a couple of these and see where it takes us.
Sure, we can, but only if Brent would enjoy it. We've toyed around with having other people read the text to give Brent a rest.
We have? Have you done this while I've been gone?
We did it on the first episode, and it made me feel uncomfortable. So I would actually enjoy it more if I read it.
I just wanted to hear you say
I appreciate the offer, and it was a nice idea. We tried it, and well, it didn't work for me.
Brent, if this were Sabbath, I would insist on reading it myself. But
yes, it is Wednesday.
Recording and publishing all outside of the Sabbath, so we're all set there.
So, Brent, give me this Luke passage where Jesus is discussing his disciples getting a little bit of trouble because they're out there harvesting. They're harvesting on Shabbat.
Not just harvesting, they're winnowing.
They're winnowing. Go ahead and read us this passage, Brent.
Winnowing is not in the text I'm about to read, but I'm sure you'll tell me where it comes into play. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and his disciples began to pick some heads of grain, rub them in their hands, and eat the kernels. Some of the Pharisees asked, "Why are you doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" Jesus answered them, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, and taking the consecrated bread, he ate what is lawful only for priests to eat, and he also gave some to his companions." Then Jesus said to them, "The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath." On another Sabbath, he went into the synagogue and was teaching, and a man was there whose right hand was shriveled. The Pharisees and the teachers of the law were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. But Jesus knew what they were thinking and said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Get up and stand in front of everyone." So he got up and stood there. Then Jesus said to them, "I ask you, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy it?" He looked around at them all, and then said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He did so, and his hand was completely restored. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law were furious and began to discuss with one another what they might do to Jesus.
And see, when I hear that passage, I hear so much of the stuff that we referenced and talked about in the last episode. And this passage for me is this wonderful guiding point of reference, not to take us back to last episode's discussion content, but in this discussion, I find some principles that are just unbelievably helpful. Whenever I get to a spot where I bump up against the Sabbath wall, or I'm trying to discern like how to get out of the moss and the weeds and the muck and the mud, and I'm just stuck. Like, this is one of two passages I always think about. Now, Josh, you had some interesting observations. You mentioned winnowing. What kind of things do you see and love about this passage?
Oh yeah, so within the set laws, like not all the different interpretations that stem from them, but there's like, I think 40 different things that the rabbis say, these are what you cannot do on Sabbath. One of them is harvesting, and one of them is winnowing, which is where, you get, basically you separate the wheat from the chaff, basically the papery covering over the grains. And that's why it mentions specifically that the disciples are rubbing their hands together. They're getting the paper off the wheat so they can eat it.
Yep.
Very true to, our conversation last week with Shinui. Like, we could look at that and say, okay, we don't harvest grain by picking it with our fingers, and we don't normally winnow it by rubbing it between our hands. That's not how it's done. So they're doing it in a way that is not, the conflict here is obviously like there's tradition, there's the rabbinic tradition, which was not even like fully codified at this point, but was definitely part of the social norm the Pharisees are getting upset about. What's interesting to me, though, is that isn't the argument he makes. That's not the tack he takes in this argument. But in light of what we talked about last week with doing things in a different way than normal, like clearly they're not actually trying to harvest a field. They're, feeding themselves on Shabbat. Like I've heard rabbis talk about how like you can't pick fruit on Shabbat, but you could go up to like a peach tree and just like sink your teeth into the fruit while it's still on the tree.
Right.
Like there's things like that. So it's that's very interesting to me that, you know, we have the text clearly pointing out like, oh, these two categories of forbidden work that they're not actually, they're doing in this strange, different, not standard way of doing the work because they're not working. They're just grabbing a snack in a field.
Yeah, I love this because there's an impulse in us whenever we have anything that's guided by what we get, that gets anything close to rules. As Westerners, we have a weird relationship with rules, with law, especially as if we're not Jews and we have any relationship to Jewish law, we have a weird relationship with understanding what law is and how it functions. Like people always write me. We talked about this years ago in our earlier sessions and seasons. People always want to go, am I doing Shabbat right? And that question comes from this place of like a relationship to the rules of what I'm allowed to or not, what's permitted or not permitted. And I love this passage. I always go back to it because here's Jesus. And he doesn't even have a conversation about traditions, which is my next passage that I have. But in this case, he just talks about straight up rules. Like you're not allowed. Like think of how holy the temple is.
Yeah.
And the consecrated emblem. Like you did a whole series, Josh, on like the holiness of the Mishkan. And Jesus is like, and David marched right into the Mishkan and his men were hungry and he ate the bread. And this is Jesus proof texting this. Like Jesus has a particular relationship. The rules are good. The rules are there. He's not unaffirming the rules. He would affirm all the rules, but he's also communicating the rules are here to lead us somewhere. There's another passage where he talks about the priests. Don't you know what the priests work on? They desecrate Sabbath because they work in the temple on Sabbath, but they do that, but they're declared holy because this is what this is. I can remember going to one of the kibbutzim that we go to over in Israel. We stay at a kibbutz. And we are often there over a weekend. We're there for like 4 or 5 days. It often spans over a weekend. There's a sign that gets put up in the bathrooms every Shabbat, just informing us all that anybody that has to work in this restroom or keep this facility operating is desecrating the Sabbath on your behalf. They're not saying that to make us feel super guilty. It's part of how they're engaging in shinui. To say we're going to do this for the sake of hospitality, for the sake of serving our guests. We're going to do it in a way that Sabbath is still put on display, just like and I think Jesus would be like, yeah, just as the priests desecrate the Sabbath by working in the temple.
Yep.
So too, we're going to clean these bathrooms. I just love this passage because it reorients my position to permitted and not permitted. And there's a passage, I believe in Matthew, Brent found for us, where my favorite line gets used. No, it was in Mark, you said. It was in Mark, where Jesus says, Sabbath was not made, excuse me, I get it backwards all the time. I'll slow down. Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And how easy it is when I think about deepening my Shabbat practice. I have to remember what Shabbat is. It's a gift. To use Rabbi Foreman's language, it's a truth-telling day. Sabbath is for me. Sabbath is for us, not the other way around. I don't serve Sabbath. Sabbath serves a larger purpose. And that's one of the principles. And if I lived in a Jewish Orthodox community, that would look a particular way that's much different than it looks for me today. But that principle is very guiding for me. Sabbath isn't a set of rules that I'm beholden to. Sabbath is a set of rules that on some level is beholden. It's a gift. There's a thing I wrestle with here, Josh. I don't know what you think about this. The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Is that a reference to Jesus, the capital S, capital M, the Son of Man? Or is it the typical usage in the Hebrew of Son of Man, referencing humanity? And I would typically be like, that's kind of a stretch. It sure sounds like it's the Son of Man, capital S, capital M to me, except for that Mark passage where Jesus' point seems to be Sabbath is for us and not the other way around. And I wonder if what Jesus is saying here is not capital S, capital M. I don't know how any of that strikes you or hits you or what you hear as you hear me pontificate there. Josh, I'm kind of taking over your series here.
No. This is great. I love all of this. I think, to answer your question, I would agree that, I mean, I think with the Mark passage especially, I'm looking here. I'm going to try and pull out some of my Greek.
Oh, no, I'm breaking out in hives already.
In this translation, it says, so the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath, or even of the Sabbath.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, and of the Sabbath. So it could be read as like, because the Sabbath is created for mankind, humanity, and not humanity for the sake of Sabbath, which that also... Do you know about the Midrash connected to that?
Maybe, but probably not, and it's why I said this in front of you.
So we've talked before about on the podcast about the multiple layers of chiasms in the days of creation.
Absolutely.
And one of them is about how we have this cycle of, we have, light, then we have water, and then we have land, and then we have light and water and land. We have first the separating, then the filling, and in those parallels, Sabbath is kind of the odd one out.
Uh-huh.
It doesn't have, and so they say Sabbath came to God and said, "Where I need a mate, I need a partner." And now I'm not sure what this conversation would have looked like at the time. I know in modern context they say that is why God created Israel, but obviously I have a slightly more expansive view of that relationship based, partially on these words right here. So I wonder if Jesus is referencing that and saying, God didn't make us to satisfy Sabbath's cry for a mate. Sabbath was created after we were. Like, Sabbath is something that God made for us. And something else that occurred to me as I was writing this series, and I wanted to share it with you, is that tell me if you can think of anything else, but and beyond Jewish midrash, because there's some midrash about this thing, but Sabbath is really the only spiritual practice we see God directly performing, like totally on his own.
Sure.
To me, like, that is such especially when I think of like the parental aspect of our relationship with God. Like, that is the first thing. Like, we're not just seeing God modeling something God wants to do, but God is also doing this for this is for God, right? Like, it's not
right.
There isn't a functional purpose to it. And
right.
So to me, that again, that's what makes the Heschel quote and all this stuff we're talking about makes so much sense. Like, Sabbath is something that transcends us. And it is so important that it is easy to get it twisted and think, oh, I've got to look my best. I got to be in the zone. I have to be on top of my game. I have to do Shabbat perfectly. And it's so easy because it is so important, but that is all rooted in this misconception and understanding that, like, this is a practice that God did to help us know what heaven is like, to help us know what God has really called us to in terms of what it means to be human, to be a creation of God, to be a child of God, is to be in Shabbat. And so to me, that the question about Lord there, I think it is really interesting, and it might depend on how we interpret Lord, because this is one where I really wish we had the Hebrew, even though I'm sure Mark was not written in Hebrew. But whenever Jesus said this, I wish I knew what word he used for Lord there. That would have been really interesting. Because, I mean, if he's referencing that midrash, maybe he's using the word for husband here.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I'm with you in that I could see it either way. I think what I would be asking is, first of all, like, what do we mean here when we're talking about being Lord of the Sabbath? Like, what does that mean? Because I think if we take it to the extreme where it's just like, I'm the king of Sabbath, I get to say what is and isn't Sabbath. Like, we can imagine where that goes in our
sure,
in our evil inclination and all that.
Well, that Mark passage is actually interesting in that all three of the passages have the Lord of the Sabbath thing, but then Mark adds that word even.
Yeah.
The Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. And I wonder if it's a reference to the relatively recent, at that time, Julian calendar. Like, oh, you think You think Caesar sets the calendar and like orders time? No, the Son of Man is Lord even of this like cycle of time.
Wow.
Interesting.
Sure. Huh.
That's juicy.
I really like the potential of it.
Or maybe it's all of them. Like I don't think any of these are mutually exclusive.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, especially not when we're talking Jesus.
Yeah, I've never thought of the possibility of it being Baal and being husband, because the Sabbath is a bride. That's what gets said every single week. Sabbath is a bride. Sabbath is a bride. So why not? Oh goodness, looking for a husband. Woo!
And two, what's the other image they use for Shabbat? Shabbat is a bride. Shabbat is also Hamalka, the queen. And I think that is kind of the tension we're getting into here.
Sheesh.
That there is something, there is a different order. There is a different rulership of Shabbat, and that there is something humbling about that, even as like the bride part of it is joyful and exciting. And I think that there is some tension there. And I wonder if we do take this to mean the, you know, like in the Narnia sense, the sons of Adam and daughters of Eve, just like humanity, if we are Lord of the Sabbath, to me, like that reminds me of what we talked about in remembering the Sabbath, where, you know, remembrance in the text is not about like informational recall. It's about like when you remember something, it becomes real. Like when I remember, oh, right, I'm supposed to be a dad right now, and I haven't been being a good dad, and now I remember that I have this duty, so now I'm going to make that a reality. To me, it seems a little bit like there could be a thing of like there is an authority, but it's in the context of like you are the one that makes Sabbath real, like in a practical sense. We decide what is Shabbat, which, I mean, especially in the context of rabbinic discourse and the prohibitions around Shabbat, like that is also literally true. Like they were having discussions about what are the things that we do and don't do on Shabbat. And I'm sure, you know, a lot of those conversations had already been had before Jesus got there. But, you know, it's still much more of an ongoing conversation in Jesus's time. Probably not so much with Shabbat, but that is the reality of what they're arguing about even.
Totally. And that, I mean, it's a perfect segue to the last piece that I have to contribute here today. I mean, my greatest insecurities, the things that I wrestle with in my Jewish identity when it comes to practicing Shabbat, is how much I don't observe the myriad, hundreds of rules surrounding Jewish Sabbath practice. And so the other passage that always I think about is, did we say this one was out of
Mark 7?
Mark 7. Go ahead and read us this passage, Brent, the first half.
So the Pharisees and teachers of the law asked Jesus, "Why don't your disciples live according to the tradition of the elders instead of eating their food with defiled hands?" He replied, "Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you hypocrites. As it is written, 'These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are merely human rules.' You have let go of the commands of God and are holding on to human traditions." And he continued, "You have a fine way of setting aside the commands of God in order to observe your own traditions. For Moses said, 'Honor your father and mother,' and anyone who curses their father or mother is to be put to death. But you say that if anyone declares that what might have been used to help their father or mother is korban, that is devoted to God, then you no longer let them do anything for their father or mother. Thus you nullify the word of God by your tradition that you have handed down. And you do many things like that."
Easy to read this passage with like this immediate condemnation and critique, this very supersessionist, like, yeah, those stupid Pharisees and those dumb Jews and all their Sabbath laws. And I've heard people obviously exegete this passage endlessly, talking about Jesus just had he wasn't Torah observant. He had a disregard for, observing the law. And we've talked before on the podcast, that's not the topic of conversation as I read this at all. I think Jesus, I've been very clear, I think Jesus always fulfilled perfectly fulfilled perfectly all of Torah. And that means having to decide what is weightier here or there as laws collide. And we've had those discussions many times. But I think Jesus was perfectly Torah observant. What I do hear him critiquing is what we might call halacha, that the tradition, it will become halacha later, like canonically, it will become like canonized. And that's the weird relationship that I have as a Jesus follower to so much of that Jewish practice. I have lots of new Messianic friends that observe Jewish halacha very, very to the letter. That is an authority for them in their Jewish identity. In my community, I often don't. And this is another passage where I often think to myself how easy it is for our traditions, our liturgy, our pursuits, our own personal rules. I even hear in here a warning, Josh, about shinui. Mm-hmm. Like, be careful about what you do, that you might even, in the ways that you do this, set aside, in the rules that you would prop up, mm-hmm. or in the rules that you would tear down.
Yes.
You set aside what the Word of God is actually calling us to, which is why I hate that impulse of, am I doing Sabbath right? I think that very question itself, when it's asked from this like this sense of anxiety, like, am I doing it right? Like, that's why I always jokingly, I've always told my students, if you're asking that question, the answer is no, because the spirit of Sabbath, this bride, this spouse, this queen is life-giving. You've talked about this Heschel quote of eternity. Like, Sabbath should be connecting us to this eternal rest. And anyway, I don't really have a resolution to that thought, but this is the other passage when I think of traditions and the place that they play. Very helpful, not always negative, very helpful, but sometimes they might even get in the way of everything that we've been diving into.
So I've actually prepared an additional Heschel quote, a double portion for today.
A double portion?
A double portion. And everything you said and all the loose ends, I think they actually feed into this really well. And it goes a little something like this. Speaking of Shabbat, it is a day on which we are called upon to share in what is eternal in time, to turn from the results of creation to the mystery of creation, from the world of creation to the creation of the world.
We're getting closer to your mystical sandbox now.
Yeah, because here's the thing. Like, yeah, the whole tension between traditions and rituals and how we navigate that space and those loopholes, and how do we go between the tension of bride and queen, being rooted in what the heart of Shabbat is. Like, a lot of times in Christian discussion, like the whole legalism thing, which, I mean, obviously we've talked about the misconceptions around that endlessly, but the opposite side of that is the spirit of the law, right? That's opposed to the letter of the law. And obviously, neither of us think that there's really an actual conflict there, but that, I think, the spirit of the law is, I believe, what Jesus is emphasizing here, right? He's like, we know that kids are supposed to honor their parents, but you've used this technicality of, oh, well, you said this is Corban, and even if your parents are counting on it for your retirement, sorry, you got to get, like, it's like, okay, that clearly is, like, it's not causing this child to dishonor their parents. It may not, on a surface level, be causing them to break that command, but it does undermine and eat away at and totally dishonor the commandment of God and the heart behind it. And that, I think, is the real issue here. Like, it is good to have these traditions. It is good to have rituals. It's good to have some fences. Like, those are all things that are good and necessary. But if it becomes the authoritative structure becomes an end in and of itself, then it is not Shabbat that is queen. And it is not Shabbat that is our bride. And that is where I love this quote, because it's saying, like, this is a day for awe. This is a day for touching on eternity. Like, at some point, and this is where I think it kind of gets into, like, Paul's conversation about, like, idol meat and this or that. It's like, hey, if it's going to pull you out of the day, if it's going to break the atmosphere of Shabbat, then don't do it, right? Like that is totally okay. But if it's something where you can handle it, or you are at a place in your faith where you can deal with it, like that doesn't necessarily apply. And this is where, again, like the point is for you to taste heaven. The point is for you to see the mystery and the wonder that is still out there, that is still all around me, all around you right now. The literal you who is sitting somewhere and listening to this podcast or walking around, like the ground under your feet is holy. All of it is. It's all made by God. And this idea of what Heschel flips here between the focusing on the world of creation and the creation of the world is the difference between the 6 days of the week. We are focused on reality as it is, the world of creation. And if we do this, then this, and causality and blah, 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 blah. On Shabbat, we are given the mystical license to throw all that out the window and to live in a different reality. And so when we are building these Sabbath practices, I think what it really calls us to is the way we live Sabbath says something about the world we are trying to create, to participating with God in creating that kingdom, creating that world where, like in Isaiah, it's like, hey, come get bread and water with no money. It's just here. It doesn't make sense. Yeah, it's not profitable. You're right. It's kind of goofy. It only works if everyone loves each other. Oh man, what a system. Oh boy. And like being given not just the license, but the duty to return there every week, and then to have additional Sabbaths. And like, I mean, man, I for a hot second, I thought about adding on to this series a breakdown of it's almost like an essay on the different levels of Sabbath in Leviticus. I think it's 25, 26, and 27.
Sure.
And right in the middle of it is this story about that's very like non-Shabbat. And I think it reveals a lot. Maybe I'll do this series in the future. But the takeaway is that when we look at the bigger levels of Shabbat, small Shabbat, every week we enjoy creation. We know that we're loved. We get out a little bigger, and we're talking about the 7 additional Shabbats that are the festivals. We have 2 at Pesach, 2 at Sukkot, bookending it, and then 3 more in between at Shavuot and Yom Teruah and Yom Kippur.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And those are like reminding us of the story, but also it directs us through the seasons. It orients us in time. It reminds us that the entire year is bringing us out of Egypt into the promised land. God will bring us through the desert. And then you start going out further, and now it's like, we're taking care of the land. We're letting the land rest. Like, in the 10 Commandments, it says,
Yep.
even your donkeys are included in parties that must rest. And now it's like even the inanimate earth is included in rest. And then we get out far enough, and it's just like, shoot, throw the whole economy out the window. Everyone, no debts. You go back to your homeland. Everyone is good. Total wiping clean of the slate. And that's a very different experience than eating nice food and having a day of enjoyment. And what I think is that there is not just a spiritual thread, there is a beam that runs straight through all those things. That is the heart of God. That at some level, part of what makes Shabbat hard to experience alone is because it won't really be a full Shabbat until we have that Jubilee, until we have Christ come back and things are made right and everyone is taken care of. That is the real Shabbat. And we are only getting a taste of it now. And that's where if we develop that taste, then we start to, and honestly, I was thinking about saying this earlier when you were asking about practices to close Shabbat. One thing I've noticed in my life is that as I have deepened my own Shabbat, I find that Shabbat, that mentality, that way of of living seep into the rest of my days. Not that I don't work, like that's, but the other stuff, the spiritual stuff that's underneath it. I mean, I had a lot of people talk to me about like, oh, how are you so, peaceful going through all this cancer stuff? And honestly, probably the realest answer is I've been doing Shabbat for over a decade, and it's like right in the center of my heart.
Yep.
There is something about it that helps us create that world.
Totally.
That is something that you can only experience when you have the kind of reverence that treats Shabbat as a queen.
Yep.
And this is where I think what Jesus says is pretty radical here. If we are actually Lord of it, that means that as we meaning all of us, like almost like, think of the body. Sometimes I think about our whole journey and story with God as like we were toddlers at one point and needed to learn some very basic things. And then as humanity grew and changed and developed, we've talked about this in regards to like Jesus coming at the right time, and like how coincidental that he shows up right when they know their text and live their text. Like, wow, what a coincidence. But Jesus is inviting us to help in the kitchen, to do some chores around the house, to actually start to exercise our spiritual capacity to not be strictly under just like do Shabbat this way, not that way, but to have some say and to be like, you know what, I think we need to do Shabbat differently. So one thing that we recently added, after doing the episode with Elle about blessing, I was just thinking about blessing all the time. And it kind of occurred to me that like, oh, you know what? Sabbath itself is like just kind of a continual space of blessing. And I don't remember Elle's full, very specific and qualitative definition of blessing, but it was great. And it reminded me a lot of Shabbat. And so what we've started doing is we don't say any blessings on Shabbat. We don't bless our food or anything like that. And every time I start to, Sophia's like, oh, we don't bless today, because everything we do is a blessing. When I eat food on Shabbat, that is the blessing, is the food that God has provided. When I stand out in the sun, the experience there is the blessing. And when we live with that awareness, God doesn't need us to say it rotely, the same way that like my wife doesn't need me to tell her I love you. I mean, I do tell her I love you a lot, but also she knows that because of how I behave. And that's just the natural progression of relationship. And why would it not be so with God? God isn't looking for us to say all the right words and the traditions. We should keep the rituals that accomplish this end of helping us see the mystery of creation. And if there's a ritual that is not doing that and rather is bringing guilt, then like Jesus is saying here, then we're putting more emphasis on following a ritual that other people created. And that is not what we are called to. We are called to this experience of God's wonder and awe and the mystery of creation and creating the world. We have learned so much, and it's like, it's time for us to put it into action and to step out in faith in terms of like how we participate in this spiritual dance with God. If
anybody were to find a transcript of that last monologue, there are some real fire emojis that are dropped throughout that little tidbit. I was like, wow, sing. So there's some good stuff in there. I just say amen to that a few times over. That's good.
Well, thanks.
Amen and amen.
And like I said, this is perfect, because I think I said this at the very beginning of the series. Like, my real goal isn't just that people start doing a Shabbat that looks like a Jewish style Shabbat. Like, I do not care in the slightest about that.
Yep.
Like Mitch's whole thing about the reflection beginning and end. That came from
so good.
Nowhere inside of any Jewish tradition I've ever heard of. But it's wonderful and it's great. And that's, to be honest, like that's how the Spirit would bring things, isn't it? Like, And like I said at the beginning, my real goal is for people to fall in love with Shabbat. Because if you are in love with Shabbat, if you know what it smells like, if you know what it tastes like, you can find it anywhere. You can find it in exile even. You can find it in a situation where you work 3 jobs and literally don't have a day off. Like, you can still you can catch a whiff of it. And that sucks. That stinks. I wish no one had to experience that. But if you know where it is, it will always be there for you, because God's presence is always there with you. And this is the spiritual cycle that God himself was like, yeah, I do this. This is realer than any ritual we can invent. That's my take on it.
If I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying the atmosphere that Heschel talked about has a smell to it.
Yes.
Smells like Shabbat.
Smells like Shabbat. Oh, yeah.
Oh, no. We're huffing chiasms and sniffing Shabbat.
Oh, yeah. Very, the rabbis say the nose, it's the most spiritual sense.
Ah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, ruach is smell. Oh, well, there we go. Hey, folks, huff the chiasm, smell of Shabbat. This is great. I love the Shabbat smell.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, this morning I became very jealous of Marty because I learned that people have been making jingles for him that sound really cool. So if anyone out there is musically inclined and wants to email me a jingle for, I don't know, I almost said huffing Shabbat, huffing a chiasm, the smell of Shabbat. I don't know. Get wild out there.
Theme music. This is the era.
Oh, wow.
If Bema had an Eras tour, Brent Billings, if Bema had an Eras tour, there's going to be a jingle era for Bema. So everybody look out.
All right. Are we done here? Should I close this out?
I think so. It's a good wrap up to a pretty good series. Not that there's not more. It sounds like Josh still has Sabbath fodder in the hopper.
Oh, yeah.
Like there's potentially more Sabbath series to come out.
And this one is crazy, too, because it is literally... I got sniped by Foreman again.
Yes, I was going to tell you that, and I decided to leave it alone. But I was going to say, dude, Foreman's all over this.
I know. I have yet to listen to it because this has happened so many times, and in my heart of hearts, I'm fine with it. I rejoice even. I'm like, oh, the Spirit is working in the hearts of all human beings. That is wonderful, and it's cool that we're on the same wavelength. But oh man, yeah, this time maybe I will listen to him before I do my series on that. We'll see. But anyway, oh man, Shabbat, everyone. Bless yourselves and bless each other with it.
Well, we come to the end of this series, much like Genesis 1 comes to an end, where it sort of doesn't end, but it does, but it doesn't. So I think it's good. It works.
Amen.
All right. Well, you can go to BayModestSelfship.com to find our show notes. Not that there's really a whole lot for the last couple episodes, but all of that's there. You can find groups. You can find upcoming events, ways to get in touch with us. It's all on the website. So thanks for joining us on the Bayma podcast. We'll talk to you again soon.
That thing you were saying earlier, Brent, about the any time in the world,
anywhere on earth.
Yes. It reminds me of in Hebrews 3, the author uses a couple remezes of things that talk about today, if you hear his voice. And at one point he says, so long as it is still called today.
Yes.
And I feel like that is exactly what you were talking about.